Okay, everyone, here we are. So, this is to be a read-through of Chapter 4 of my forthcoming book, The August View. I'm now on Draft 3, but I wanted to actually give you guys a good sample of it. Now, my chapters are pretty long, and so therefore there's a lot of stuff in the chapters that would spoil, but Chapter 4 is actually a good slice of the book that doesn't reveal too much. The isolated makes sense because it's in its own sort of, stratosphere, following a particular group of characters. And I think, not fourth chapter of the first book, Jesus, I don't write that fast. But this is to be a read-through of Chapter 4, which I hope you will all enjoy. It should give you all a good flavour of the book, the style, and maybe a little teaser as to the story. So without any further ado, we'll get right into it. I've got some background ambiance to play, so fret not. Nothing too intrusive to the atmosphere, I should think, but something that just sort of livens the air a bit. Oh, listen to that! You see that? You hear that? Okay. Well then, let's get straight into it, ladies and gentlemen. So, up on there is our itinerary. There are I don't know why that part has part 4, so let me just tweak that. That is actually part 7. Spooky. Okay. If we're all ready, then we will begin. I'll be taking some breaks throughout this, by the way, just in case, because there's a lot to read. So just sit back, enjoy. Chapter 4, Part 1. The Field of Thought. Lucy Lacemaker heard the unmistakable blast of the 5th tone echo throughout the underberth as all the city's song towers sung in unison. The power of the vibration almost knocked her off her feet as she sprinted after the red and wine light leading to Mivium. The black phase was hot on her heels. She could feel behind her the breath of nothingness howling, the unseen shroud of impossible void. She maintained a steady pace, huffing and panting as the warm glow of Mivium drew closer, hoping that the illumination before her would fight off the impending shadow behind. Give me a second. I'm just going to level that audio because I think it's leveled for you guys, but for me it's really fucking loud in my ear. So let me just, there we go, that's much better. Thank you.
I'm hoping it does it gets really intense.
Oh yeah, I'll have to balance that as well. Yeah, don't worry.
That'll be fucking fun.
Hoping that the illumination would help her. Yeah, okay. Hoping that the illumination before her would fight off the impending shadow behind. Just a little further, she thought to herself in between breaths of trembling exhaustion. Her mind fought her body in a war against the engine and the motor. For the first time in a long while, the smell of life filled Lucy's pear-shaped nostrils and the sound of bustle danced through her drooping ears. The pain became intense, her chest tightened, her muscles screamed, and her brain filled with panic as the world around her became black. The last thought in her mind was one of dread. The black phase had finally caught up, and in that nightmarish emptiness she would surely perish. It seemed to be instant. Fear turned to confusion as Lucy opened her eyes. She lay on her back, body in a state of convulsion and her pink tongue partially protruded. She could move her eyes, but little else. Half her body was bathed in light and the other in darkness as she regarded the outskirts of Mivium town with silver eyes of hope. It would seem that she had outrun the black phase after all, only such a task had rendered her temporarily unconscious. To her relief, the ink that took her was that of the mind and not of the physical world. Her brain whirled and her vision spun mercilessly. Laying just out of reach was the twisted bottle that she had thieved from Goldoon, fully unwrapped and exposed. Lucy rolled onto her belly and began to crawl towards the bottle. Her pace increased the moment she heard footsteps fast approaching. Louder they became, but she was too frazzled to place their source. With a small, nail-crowned hand, she eventually secured the bottle and pulled it closer with a light scrape. Suddenly, the little illumination that bathed her dimmed as the shadow of a tall, lanky figure loomed over her. She looked up with squinting eyes, but the features of the figure were silhouetted and unreadable. Before she could respond in any possible way, an unkind foot planted itself into her cheek and knocked her head back to the floor. With her eyes rolled back, body twitching and tongue fully protruded with indignity, Lacemaker was forced back into the gloom of rotulation by this unknown aggressor. Noise, laughter, hollering and lusty banter echoed through the air like invisible spirits of emotion, warning away the weak and challenging the strong. It was an unscrupulous sort of commotion that battered down on Lucy's ears as her eyes rolled back to the front of her head, flickering like a malfunctioning machine. She was on the floor. Hang on. Give me a second. She saw the floor, beautifully placed cobblestone with tendrils of light worming between a few of the larger cracks. Dangling in and out of focus was her tongue, yet she had not the energy to conceal it. Her arms were also limp, swaying with every footstep taken by the creature who had a hold of her ankles. Like a limp piece of meat, Lucy was carried through Mivium and regarded by hungry settlers as they passed. Humiliating, thought Lucy. Knocked to a rotter and paraded publicly. Is this how my life will end then? She regained a little control of herself and wriggled. Give me a second. Just gonna tweak that. Okay, is this going?
What?
Is it running?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, I'm just making sure. Sorry, what?
I was going to say, this chapter's short. It's only 20 pages.
Only 20 pages.
Yeah.
What the fuck? She regained a little control of herself and wriggled, but the lanky beast tightened his grip with a masculine grunt. Male, possibly cuticulated. Strong, but that's relative to me. Don't say much. Lucy's nose twitched to life, and she took in the scent around her. Chop shops. With all her might she sucked in her tongue and took a light breath. Let's regain a little dignity. Moving on. Who is this crawler? She glanced up to her captor. He was a tall and rather lean build, not the strongest looking fellow, a result of his slender frame. He had a mildly long neck decorated with short, youthful spikes at each side. These were made more prominent by his flowing black hair that grew gold from the roots. It was a wild, free display, and seemed to be present all the way down his spine. He looked shy, but well kempt. His body was packaged in a long black trench coat, untied at his waist. His chest was covered in a thick layer of inky warmth, leaving the rest of his body oily smooth with white skin. He had deep yellow eyes set ablaze with caution, made fiercer by darker patches of flesh that swirled around them like storms. His eyes are intense, but that's biological. They move too much, darting from left to right. He's nervous, fragile, Lucy analysed. Teeth ran through his lips and decorated his cheeks with a sense of elegant viciousness, and his long tempering nails threatened to break the definition of black as they curled and flexed. In the breast pocket of his coat sat the twisted bottle, stolen from her by yet another obstacle to negotiate. So he took the bottle then? He must know it's worth something at the very least. Does he know what it is? Is he a trader? No, not a trader, too uneasy. So why take the bottle? Is he employed? Is he working for someone? Who? Lacemaker's ponderings were interrupted when her lanky captor suddenly turned left and entered the threshold of Marvell's chop shop, a grungy building of steam, smoke and spice. I knew it. Just my luck. The smell of the chop shop was overwhelming, flavoured flesh and meat. The foyer was packed with headless and contorted bodies, some used for tables, others for seating. It was common for street businesses to use empty vessels in this way, but in most high-end establishments they would opt for crafted furniture. Upon their chests, bellies and backs were a vast array of pre-caticulated Kivawakians, or fowlers for short, a name for the unmatured youths. Their headless bodies bubbled in broth glazed with oil and spice. Above the heads of the feasting clientele were iron railings on which the folded bodies of captured youths would hang. Bells rang with every order, and to each table the rails would carry the meals to those who had ordered them for cruel consumption. If ever one wished for the mysticism of death to be unveiled, then one might wish to enter a chop shop. For in the Kivawak, death meant failure, and failure was humiliating. It mattered not if they failed young. The light inside was lavender and calm, a much-needed offset to the orchestra of gnashing teeth, barking conversation, and the obliteration of failed youth. "Marvell!" the lanky beast called out, in a voice that was clipped, powerful, and far more refined than Lucy's own. "I have something for you." To Lucy's ears, his voice said more than his words. Definitely not a trader, but surprisingly prideful, not too authoritative, she deduced. "I can beat this. It's no matter of muscle, only competence. I can beat this." From beyond the gloom of red smoke and hot steam, Marvell minced into view, a thoroughly sceptical fellow who shifted with unease at the sight of his summoner. He sheepishly approached with his two pointed legs stabbing along the floor like needles. "Ludwig," the chopper greeted, his voice like trickling honey. "What have you got there?" "Wiley's end of the deal," Ludwig replied, holding up Lucy, who continued to fake dormancy by letting her tongue flop out, choosing to swallow the shame it brought her. "Oh, loquacious!" "Say again?" "Good," Marvel rephrased in a sarcastic flavour. "One of Wiley's inspired words, correct?" "I don't care if you make a mockery of Wiley, just don't let him hear you." "I'm ending the contract between us. Do you care about that?" "What? Why?" the lanky Inca spat. "Your chop shop and Ruthergush have been in business since I started there." Ludwig frowned as Marvel rolled his 6 olive eyes. "Bring the fowl around back and I'll explain." Marvel's rabbit-like face twitched with enthusiasm as his thin forelegs tapped and carried him back into the gloom. Marvel's hairless body was a light pink, although some creamy shades did intrude upon his belly, chest and chin. Ludwig lumbered close behind as the two entered the area of the shop fit for the preparation of sustenance. There were wooden extrusions from the perimeter of the walls, chopping boards populated with half-prepared bodies, and in the corner was a fearsome meat grinder, a producer of minced flesh used for the creation of kivik pies. The machine's blood-stained teeth rolled over one another, and the whole thing was powered by piping steam, a horrid-looking contraption. The smell of the kitchen was overwhelmingly strong. Lucy's nose took it in, and her mind was sent back to Vileborn. Watching Golddoom from that chop shop, the anticipation, the heat of the damp air. I remember as if it were moments ago. Anxiety, ecstasy, focus. The smell of this kitchen is the same. How odd that I should now feel the same, the power of a memory. The worst pies in London. Yeah, fucking damn right.
You're gonna think that that's part of the book.
No, that's just me saying it. No, don't worry. Lucy peeked around the kitchen with horror, as she saw up close the fate of those who had not the cunning to live to caticulation, to maturity. Not me, she thought, as Ludwig set her down on the wooden board, and turned to the chopper. "Listen, Marvell," said Ludwig, nodding towards Lucy, who continued her act of dormancy, listening intently. "You're the last chop shop that Wiley needs to pay off. On his behalf, I've brought you 5 fresh fowlers. This makes the 6th we agreed. Why cut the contract with Wiley?" Marvell scratched his chin with his cleaver-like fingers, the nails so sharp they sung like tuning forks whenever they accelerated through the air. "Tatler Inca's made a better offer than your stinking Ruthergush. I've already signed the deal with him," the chopper explained. "But Tatler is all the way down in the underlayer of the town. You'll be waiting a lot longer for your papers. Ruthergush is just 2 streets away. Worth the wait, they provide better stories," argued Marvel. "Nothing like that satirical drivel you print down Piper Street. Tatler had a story about a Hammerlowian dollhouse caught with huge stashes of illegal perfume or something. Quite the scandal. Excuse me? It was a big bust-up. Mire, they called it. Some perfume in twisted bottle. They had sketches. Either way, a much better story than what you low-brow idiots print. Plus, they don't put me in awkward situations as Wiley did. Selling off the body of a Yosh wasn't an easy task. Wiley is appreciative of the risk you took. Shouldn't he be here, settling his own debts? Let me worry about that," Ludwig asserted. "Just tell Tatler that you're already dealing with Ruthergush." "Trying to cozy up to your superior," Marvel sneered. "I took you for an Inca, not a dolly." "Me? A dolly? You're the one selling yourself to every other Incaus, it seems," Ludwig retorted. much to the amusement of Lucy, curiosity growing. She lay motionless and allowed her captors to paint the picture for her. An Inca, settling a debt on behalf of his employer, she determined. 7 more Fowlers, then I'll reconsider Ruthergush, Marvel insisted, his face turning sour. And if I get it into my head for any reason that you won't deliver, I'll set the yosh on your little inkhouse. Then you, Wiley, Shale, and your entire establishment will be torn down brick by brick. Perhaps they'll even reward me with your body, as I'll make quite a few pies from that. From that collection of mingled flesh. Ludwig shook his head, narrowed his eyes, and squared up to Marvel. You wouldn't want to draw Yoshan eyes to this situation, Marvel, he contended. Bring any matter to the Yoshan, it creates an inquiry that sucks in speculation. It infects everything and everyone. That would include you. I didn't kill the Yosh, Ludwig. No, you just diced and sold off the body, along with the rest of this crooked street. The others didn't know where the meat came from. Wiley didn't even tell me it was a Yosh until her torso was diced into quarters. Oh, well, I'm sure the Yosh would understand in that case, Ludwig mocked. Marvell smirked, unconvinced by Ludwig's games. 7 more Fowlers or you get your lanky ass out of my chop shop. You're forgetting Wiley. He killed a Yosh, Ludwig warned. You think he won't deal with you? I heard the rumours. It was only a 1-strike Yosh. Marvel dismissed. 1 strike more than you, Marvell, said Ludwig. And I'll spare you any further research. The other rumours about Wiley, they're also true. He plucks out the eyes of those he detests, has a large stock of past employees turned furniture. 2 tones ago, he crushed Vivian's head in the printing machine. Wiley does not suffer fools. I've worked with him long enough to know. The two stood in a stare-down of intimidation, which Marvell was winning, until suddenly the twisted bottle in Ludwig's pocket caught the light and twinkled. Marvell regarded it with curiosity. Is that what I think it is? He asked, in a hushed tone. Lucy's ears perked up. I don't know. Maybe. Ludwig caressed the bottle. Wiley will know for sure. Wiley, Lucy thought. He seems to be my best bet then. But based on what I've heard, he's a nasty piece of work. Immune to reason, no good. May need to work him a bit. But first I need to get out of my current predicament. 1 step at a time, Lucy. 1 step at a time. Marvell backed away and screwed his face in a perplexing manner, spitting, You walked into my chop shop with that? Didn't you read the papers? We don't read, Tattler, we just print drivel, apparently, Ludwig shrugged. It's the same stuff they found at that dollhouse in Sec. Marvell furiously pointed back to the exit of the kitchen. Get out! I didn't steal it, if that's what you're worried about. You've settled your bloody debt, and my contract with Ruthergush is over, Marvell fumed. Stinking law fiddlers, the lot of you. Yes, say it a little louder. I think there's a headless body over there who didn't quite catch that, Marvell. The lanky Inca spat and bared his impressive set of teeth. Lucy rolled around slowly and peeked at her 2 captors through her left eye, distracted by their confrontation. Both distracted by their confrontation. She had concocted her plan. Take your bottle of illicit perfume and go, Marvell demanded, and turned to begin preparing Lucy's body for consumption. He stopped abruptly when he found her stood up on the chopping board, arms crossed in defence over her chest and frowning. You won't, Lucy smugly replied, because you'll be dead by the next light phase. Ludwig shot around with a waft of his coat. Afraid of shame, I'll sort her, he said as he thundered towards the small female. Big mistake, Lanky, Lucy asserted, backing away. Big mistake. What do you mean I'll be dead? Asked Marvell, his head cocked sideways like a confused dog. Right, because that thing in his pocket, Lucy pointed hurriedly to Ludwig's breast pocket, he took it from me. Now he's trying to get you to sell me off like that body, like the body of that Yosh, putting the blame on you. The blame? My death, Lucy clarified. I'm no expert, but when Fontaine finds out that one of his distributors was killed by a chopper, you might be in for a bit of an unpleasant visit. Fontaine? Marvell quivered, his face turning white. My employer, Lucy lied, and pointed to Ludwig again. He works for Fontaine's rival, Winder. A lie, but she told it rather well. She's talking rot, Ludwig laughed. Trying to save her head. Marvell slammed his fist onto the sideboards and turned to Ludwig. "Where did you get that bottle from then?" he demanded. Because first I read about this new elusive product, then you show up with it in your pocket. You've already had the choppers of Royden Street do your dirty work." "Go on," Lucy teased Ludwig. "Tell this fine chopper that you didn't take the bottle from me. And if that's a lie, tell him where you did get it from." Marvell's face told Lucy everything. He didn't trust Ludwig in any capacity. He was deeply intimidated by the Yolch and terrified of Fontaine, a law-abiding citizen. Her lie had tipped an already skeptical mind into a downward spiral of distrust, hatred, fear, and she knew that at any moment those emotions would turn to action. As they always did. Ludwig looked to Lucy, then Marvell, back and forth. His yellow eyes darted, mouth salivating, nostrils flaring. "Here we go," Lucy thought to herself, back against the wall as Ludwig and Marvell ran at each other with deadly intent. Marvell went straight in with a left hook, catching Ludwig on the cheek, who then replied with a knee to Marvell's ribs, and followed with a headbutt to the bridge of the chopper's nose. Marvell hissed, and began to slash blindly away at Ludwig, who quickly raised his forearms in defence. The feral attack shredded Ludwig's sleeves as blood and cloth sprayed into the air. The Inca broke the pattern of attack and rammed a clenched fist into the chin of the chopper, but Ludwig's whole arm only cracked against the superiority of the chopper's fully matured body. "The Inca's a fowler, like me," Lucy realised, watching Ludwig wince and wave the pain away from his aching hand. "He's large, as some youths are, but he's still just a crawler." Ludwig wiped his mouth of blood and backed away from Marvell, but the chopper approached with surprising speed and struck him to the floor with a backhanded strike. Upon landing on the floor, the contraband bottle rolled free from Ludwig's breast pocket and towards Lucy, who jumped from the sideboard, skittered along the floor, and snatched it with her tail. Ludwig attempted to stop her, but with one of his sharp feet, the chopper stabbed Ludwig through the shoulder, pinning him on his back to the floor. The lanky beast let out a low grunt and struggled, scratching helplessly at Marvell's foreleg. Lucy turned to see the struggling Inca and considered him for a moment. Sure, he stood at around 5 feet, but it didn't take away from the fact that his body was unmatured, weak and powerless against the fully developed chopper. That explains his cautious gaze. This fellow's been hiding his youth in plain sight, banking on his competence to not break cover, Lucy deduced. And then I came along. Marvell pressed down harder and harder and flexed his cleavish fingers. He pulled back in preparation for the killing blow and mocked, "I'll have fun selling off your body. More than that pretty Yolchian, miss. Believe that, fowler." Aiming for the soft olive eyes, Lucy suddenly jumped forward from the shelf and landed onto Marvell's face, scratching and biting at the soft gelatinous tissue nestled within the sockets of his skull. The chopper piercingly screamed, but even that was cut off when she swiveled around and sunk her teeth into his wriggling tongue. With an opportunity presented, Ludwig arose, clutching his shoulder, and roared as he rammed the chopper backwards. Lucy jumped from his face, Maya still in the grip of her tail, and landed on a work surface nearby as Marvell was thrust back until his tail entered the rotating grip of the mighty metal mincer of meat. Feeling a surge of confidence, Lucy picked up a stray dish and frisbeed it across the kitchen and into Marvell's face, knocking his head back into the crushing jaws of his own machine. The chopper went limp, his gower sprayed hot vilt and his body hideously convulsed as he was consumed by the device, which eventually jammed once it reached his protesting ribs. Ludwig stood over the remains of the dead chopper in shock and disbelief. Sweat trickled from his brow and his heart pounded in his chest. He turned to see Lucy watching from a distance, her little face also in a state of shock, if not a little smug. "What have you done?" Ludwig huffed. "What am I supposed to do now?" "Bake him into a pie?" Lucy shrugged as Ludwig shook his head in dismissal. She watched as he caught his breath and regained his composure. Not once did he break eye contact, even going so far as to half blink, for fear of her suddenly vanishing back into the mists of obscurity from whence she came. "So," she began, attempting to break the awkward tension, "where do we go from here? We? Ludwig sneered. There is no we. Do you have even the foggiest idea of what you've... Ludwig looked over his shoulder, then back to Lucy, concluding with a whisper. What you've done! The anger filtered to his face to save his voice from roaring. Protected myself, that's surely understandable. I mean, that's got to be reasonable, right? She answered. Then helped you, you ungrateful tit. She clocked Ludwig's face of absolute befuddled bitterness and decided to argue her case further. You were in debt to this soft-minded Gower. Now he's dead. Meat for his own shop. He was in business with our ink house. Ludwig shook his head in disbelief. My employer will kill me for this. He wasn't in business with you, though. I'm sure I remember him telling you how rubbish your papers are. Don't be so dramatic, your boss won't kill you. Not if you make him whole. Ludwig shifted his gaze to the bottle clutched in the coil of Lucy's tail. And how might I do that? What, this? Lucy quirked. Nah, mate. Couldn't give this away. As bad as your employer is, Fontaine's worse. What is it, a drink? Lucy remembered the Tatler papers, the one Marvell was so invested in. You think the Yolks would kick up all this fuss over a bevy? Nah, this is much more valuable. Lying came easy to old Lacemaker. Too easy, in fact. You could have stolen it, Ludwig suspected. If Fontaine is even real, I highly doubt he'd hire a feckless fowler. Pfft, your employer hired you. I'm not a fowler. You can smell a fowler body from a mile away, which is why you found work as an inker, the polka-dotted Lucy concluded, to mask the stench of your youth. To mask the stench of youth about you. Very clever. Cleverer than you. And yet it's you that needs me. Lacemaker smiled. Nah, I should just sell this off to this Wiley fellow. He sounds like the guy who knows his trinkets. In that case, it's you that needs me, Ludwig snorted. I don't know how much you heard, but Wiley's a killer and doesn't suffer the games of anyone. A second, let me just reset this. There we go. Doesn't suffer the games of anyone. Lucy eased herself closer to Ludwig, showing him a slight sign of trust in order to lower his defences. I never said I'd trade with him directly. She stopped just out of his reach to be safe. I mean, I could trade with you, if the price is right. Lucy had already planned her next move, her confidence bead from her tiny, red-whiskered face. Ludwig regarded her curiously and calmly nodded. I think we better step outside, he said. As he stood to his full height of 5 feet, brushed himself free of grime. Of the grime of dried blood. Lucy watched him enter through the... Oh, to anyone just joining, I didn't read chapter 1, 2 or 3. This is just an isolated read through of chapter 4 because it's a good little taster for what the book is sort of like, you know. Lucy watched him exit through the back passage that led behind the shop. With careful steps, along with a tight grip of her bottled leverage, she followed Ludwig to the back alley. Lucy made sure to keep to the walls, maintaining a height advantage over Ludwig in case he had thoughts of treachery swimming through his mind. Lucy mentally summarised. An inker, sure, that might suit me. Now I have a way in. This Ludwig fellow's definitely curious and wanting of what I have. I'll keep myself out of his way until we reach an understanding, until I'm confident that I'm safe. That'll take some time, but time isn't exactly a problem. I don't need him to understand. I just need him to do what I ask. My life will depend on it. Keeping to her plan, she made her way into an alley behind Marvel's chop shop. Ludwig lounged upon the wall opposite her, his hair, coat and trousers lying upon its surface like that of a floor, gravamassa at work. Lucy negotiated her way up past the lintel of the door and around a set of iron bars that framed one of the upper windows. She then caged herself behind them. If pursued, she would be protected long enough to make her escape. Tied to one of the bars to her right was a ragged cloth. It was yellow with black stripes. Lucy took note of it and recalled. Vileborn dollhouse, that singing dolly. She looked pretty but intense, a daring display of warning and contrast. Yellow and black. Another memory, this time held in colours. Ludwig unstuck himself from the wall and looked at the youth with seething admiration. You're a careful one, aren't you? He said, crossing his arms in defence as Lucy wrapped her hands around the metal bars of advantage. I don't trust too good. Don't be offended. I wouldn't say I'm offended, but I am extremely miffed. Fair enough. How do we change that? Because the way I see it, I need to sell this bottle. I need to sell off this bottle. Once I do, my contract with Fontaine ends. I never want to work for that fella again, let me tell you. Lucy faked a mild panic and glanced around with anxiety. Truth now, I need to sell this bottle. But I need someone who knows its worth. Ludwig curiously scratched his chin. You're cunning but fragile, eh? Met plenty of your type before. You think you can trick the system just to get what you want, but then you realise it isn't that simple, falling for the bait. Aye, like the way you're hiding in that ink house, Lucy sniped, but when she saw Ludwig's eyes squint with ire, she shifted her tone to a depressing one. I mean, look at me. I'm not as big as you, so, you know, you gotta ask yourself, what's the point? A vague statement, but again she sold it rather well. So the sound of her own performance annoyed her. To even play at fragility was infuriating. Little idiot. Ludwig muttered to himself before speaking again to Lucy. I'd be more than happy to take that bottle off your tail. Just tell me what you want for it. Rothergush. You want Rothergush? Are you insane? I want a job at Rothergush, tit. Lucy boiled. Can you sort that? Ludwig held out his arm in demand of the prize. I'll talk to Wiley. Whatever, sure. You think I'm an idiot or something? Lucy fumed. I told you I don't trust Daisy. Ludwig lowered his arm in mild defeat, knowing that Lucy wasn't about to make this situation an easy one. To him, she was frazzled and untuned. Look, he began, pointing to the bottle she held in her tail. That item you have there, it is illegal, and you will get caught with it eventually, either by a Yosh or by some less scrupulous killer. You need to find someone to take it off your hands fast or ditch it altogether. He then placed his hands on his hips, exhaling his frustration. Doesn't mean I'm dumb enough to give it away for free, Lucy insisted. Okay, Ludwig conceded. How do I get you to trust me, or at least my word? I want a job at Rothergush, but I don't need you to put in a good word for me. From what I've heard, Wiley will be harder to convince than that. Okay, but what specifically do you want me to do? Lucy fondled the striped cloth that was tied around the window bars and began to unravel it. She knew that Ludwig lusted after her bottled prize, and that given his dire situation he would do almost anything to obtain it and please his employer. Lucy pulled the yellow and black cloth free and toyed with it. She then took a moment to think through her own plan. She whispered to herself, counted on her fingers and inspected the cloth intensely. Memorable, but not enough. Lucy eventually stopped and focused her attention back onto the waiting Inca below. Right then, does Wiley visit any doll houses? She asked, in a change of tone that caught Ludwig off guard. Raising an eyebrow, he responded. Excuse me? Crossing his arms once more. Doll houses, does your employer partake? She demanded again. Fine wire dollhouse down Viro Street. What relevance does that have? Lucy nodded, but continued to fondle the cloth. She scrunched it up and brought it to her nose. With a deep inhale, she took in the scent. Damp hair, rotted blood, too common. It awakens nothing. Certainly nothing to one such as Wiley. Yeesh. The yeesh wasn't actually in the book, that's just me saying it. Does he have a preferred dolly there? She quizzed. Ludwig sighed, visibly exhausted by the youth. Yet he had no choice other than to play her game. She had robbed him of vital ground, and now she seemed to hold his only chance at salvation. A lad called Brock. A colourful fellow, he answered. Does this Brock use any perfume? Ludwig grumbled. He uses spiced juniper, very strong stuff. Good. Perfect. Let's go with that. Lacemaker threw the cloth down to Ludwig, who caught it in between the index finger and thumb of his left hand. He looked upon the cloth utterly impressed. Lucy pushed. You happen to have any of that spiced juniper lying about your ink house? I don't. It burns my eyes. Ludwig's nose twitched at the thought. But one of my co-workers, Shale, she likes it. She'll have a bottle somewhere. Is this going anywhere in particular? Lucy sicked her full smile on him and beamed with glee. You want specifics? She began. Listen closely, and it'll all make sense.
I want to know all about Wiley, what makes him tick. I want data, simple, easy data. But here's the thing, I've not the mind to go anywhere near him, not based on what I've heard. So listen, I want you to take that cloth, obtain that perfume, and go back to your inkhouse, right? Then, for the next 3 song tower chimes, whenever Wiley smiles, laughs, giggles, or experiences pleasure in any way, I want you to pull out that cloth and spray it with the perfume. You can wipe your brow, clean a glass, or do whatever, I don't care. Just make sure it's in my area of perception, yeah? Lucy clocked Ludwig's face of puzzlement, but continued regardless. It's a signalling system, like I said. I want to know what makes Wiley tick. Every time he's happy, I'll see it and I'll smell it. Once that's done, I'll meet you back here at Roydon Street and give you the bottle, but only if you do this. I'll be watching, and if you slack off and pay my demands no mind, you'll never see me or your prize again. Ludwig and Lucy stared at each other for a short and awkward while. Lucy could tell from Ludwig's face that he had written her off as a maniac long ago, but mania has no intentions, and intentions Lucy had. So, you want to use me as an instrument for research? Ludwig asked, then began to chortle and sneer at the lunacy of Lucy's request. You're absolutely out of your head! He began to calm down, wiping a tear from his eye. Colours and perfumes, a signalling system indeed, such nonsense. You've clearly some condition, documented or not, and I won't entertain it any further, he asserted, pocketing the striped cloth all the same, and began to make his way out of the alley. It's okay. He'll have to come around eventually, Lucy consoled herself. If he thinks me mad, then so be it. Madness has a sort of honesty to it. The mad make for poor deceivers, because in order to abuse truth, you first need to understand it. I think trickery is natural to all living things. It's logical, and at least it feels logical. But that's the thing about madness. It's not bound by logic. This little Inca will change his mind, and then he can help me change another. Lucy stopped just shy of the glow emanating from the bustling street and turned back to her. You'd never have gotten the job anyway, even if you did know all of his likes and interests. It'd be better if you just left Mivium. Lucy watched Ludwig wander away into the flurry of the market. In all fairness, her move was a risky one. Ludwig needed to believe that despite being a bit of a loon, Lucy meant what she said and would honour the deal in the end. This process would take time, and Lucy was certainly satisfied with the groundwork. She made sure to give herself a little while before following, as she wanted not to unhinge him any further. All he needs is a little push, she thought. Ludwig was not hard to follow. He tended to avoid busy streets and thoroughfares. He walked as if he were an outcast, with his hands in his pockets, head down and brooding. He did not strut, he did not gloat, he simply lumbered his way through Mivium, up streets and across coiled bridges. Lucy could tell that Ludwig was very intelligent, and she certainly wasn't proud. Odd for a Kivawakian, Lucy thought. Who is this lone, brooding thinker who sheathes his teeth behind soft lips and binds his claws in gently woven pockets? From what she had observed, Ludwig certainly wasn't congruent in his communication. His body language was calm, his voice was clipped in clear, but his eyes shouted anxiety, an attempt to fake something he was not. He certainly wasn't easy to manipulate as she had hoped, but she believed that he would submit to her peculiar demands, and it would only be a matter of time. Lucy eyeballed her prey from a fair height and sighed to herself. Psychology is patient work. Part 2. The Changing Mind. Before long, Ludwig turned onto Piper Street, which was shaped like a warped helix, spiraling around and populated with various establishments, doll houses, chop shops, and laugh houses. Amidst the plethora of businesses sat the inkhouse in which Ludwig worked, Ruthergush. It was a building that seemed to produce a baffling amount of smoke, and from its exterior were gutters that expelled black ink into a water channel below. The building was a monster, a churning engine of information and black linguistical venom, a colossus comprised of dark stained bricks, framed in exoskeletal metal gates and cruel bars. The noise it produced was like that of an asthmatic titan, howling and huffing, punctuated with coughs from the blistering machinery inside. Ruthergush was Lockettian in style, an architectural flavour designed by Lockett. While Sombrarian was quaint, idyllic, and classic, and as Winterwardian was hard, cold, and audacious, Lockhettian was rather had an essence of industry about it. These structures were commonly comprised of black brick, whistling pipes, wriggling pistons, and twisted metal. The style of the lady's mind, logical, intense, and magnificently engineered. Ludwig stood before the entrance, took in a deep breath, and with a jittery exhale, laced with anxiety, entered the ink house. Once inside, the inner workings of the Lockhettian building became apparent. Hot ink was channeled through rattling pipes and was delivered to a central unit of gears, pistons, and basic mechanics like blood to a beating heart, although the device was more akin to lungs, wheezing and complaining with exhalations of scorching steam. It was a printing machine. With needle-like extremities, it articulated and pressed language upon white and eager paper. What was fed into the machine as clean and pure came out dripping with black battered fact and information, burned into its previously unremarkable flesh with ruthless intent. Across the erratic space, Ludwig spotted his employer, the editor of the ink house. He leaned ominously against one of the ghoulish gates that framed the perimeter of the instrument. He was serpentine, possessing a long body that was punctuated with 14 limbs, 6 of which were planted on the ground. His body was fluffy, yellow of a sunny, attractive shade, made more so by lighter strips of cream that were horizontal and equidistantly placed along his surface like an eccentric breed of stocking. His nose was almost glowing with a red hue, complementing his orange eyes rather nicely, of which there were 5. His ears were pointed, and there were 4 in number. Their stoutness made his 2 curled horns out to be longer than they were, with a tangerine mane nicely oiled. Wiley was a well-groomed fellow, and ruggedly suave, sporting a long black coat that trailed down his body. Clutched between 4 of his upper limbs was a freshly printed paper. His eyes were alight with amusement, and his black lips curled to a vile grin as he read. Now and again he would screw his face in displeasure, scratching out the part of the writing with his ginger fingernails. Standing next to him was Shale, a female who held herself with a rugged sort of pride. She slouched just short of Wiley's height of 10 feet, and seemed eager to receive his attention. Whenever he would glance at her, her snake-like face lit up, and her 2 beady eyes of aqua sparkled with anticipation, only to sink back into dissatisfaction whenever Wiley returned to his reading. Shale's neck was very long, and from her head down her back there was a spiked mohawk of aqua and peach hair. Her arms were also long, if not a little thin, and her knuckles rested upon the floor, supporting her weight like a gangly gorilla. From her fingertips were ferocious nails, blue and outrageously long, curling behind her like the folded wings of a bat stripped of its flapperish tissue. Her legs and chest were covered generously in the same peachy blue shade as her gladiatorial hair, leaving the soft skin of her winding tail, neck, belly, arms, and face exposed. Ludwig timidly made his approach, treading softly as to not interrupt Wiley's scrutiny of the paper. The closer he got, the colder his body became, defying the hot breaths of steam that kissed his flesh as he wafted through their ghostly embrace. Shale looked to him in civility, nodded gently and smiled. Ludwig returned an awkward stare, but it quickly faded when Wiley looked up from his reading material and scowled. "What did our precious flesher friend say?" The Inca oozed in his slick voice of confidence and charm. "Will the quiverous little gower keep to our arrangement?" Ludwig stood in silence and looked around nervously. "Speak, you haggard about Weimar!" Wiley's words twisted and wormed from his mouth, many of them inventions of a mind sick with its own ego, meanings that were known only to himself. 6 pre-articulated crawlers, that was the deal. He should know better than to twiddle his chances. "Marvel has cut the contract with Ruthergush, sir," Ludwig said with stone-faced honesty. Wiley screwed his face as if he'd just ingested his own tongue and demanded, "Say again, you doltish rotter." "He's also dead," the awkward Inca added with a straight face, fearing to express anything other than nothing at all. Marvel acted rashly and unreasonably. In his outburst, he fell into his own mincer, an abysmal liar. So, he fell into his own mincer, yeah? Wiley quizzed and approached Ludwig, beginning to giggle. Now that is interesting. His face was inches from Ludwig. The bubbling anger in his voice was terrifying. You lying rattlegower! Wiley swiped one of his claws across Ludwig's face, scraping the nails against bone. Ludwig grunted as hot blood splattered from his head and onto his shoulder. The wound immediately began to heal. The gash dried out in seconds and the flesh mended. A warning. Wiley seized the back of Ludwig's neck and forced him to his knees. He stood over him, pressing him down to into submission, and boiled. Don't you ever lie to my face again, you little weemer! The stinking drool exuded from Wiley's mouth as he raged. Now tell me, honestly, tell your Wiley what happened. There was an intervention from a third party, Ludwig pleaded. Who? The Fowler I brought him, to settle the debt. She woke up, spun some rubbish about Fontaine. He shivered as Wiley's drool intruded down the back of his coat. Marvel panicked, I had no choice. Wiley relented and allowed Ludwig to rise to his feet. You were outwitted by your own stock, he laughed. Still, Marvel's chop shop is lost. Almost certainly, but I'm working on it, Ludwig hurriedly assured, his wound now fully healed. Give me, he cursed himself, give me 2 chimes to make it right with you, sir. Is that another lie? Wiley fumed as Ludwig's breath slowed, regaining his composure. Not at all, sir. I can bring you something very valuable. What is it? It's better you see it, assured the lanky Inca. You'll know its worth. I just need 2 chimes to get it. Do not awaken my optimism if it is not to be fulfilled, warned Wiley, who paused his temper and reluctantly lounged back against the gate. Bring this trinket to me. Ludwig exhaled deeply and looked up in relief. Then he saw it, a face he thought he'd never see again, the face of Lucy Lacemaker. She lounged on a pipe many meters above him and waved innocently. He could scarcely believe it. She had performed the labour of following him through the streets of Mivium and now looked down upon him as if she were a final beacon of salvation. I don't believe it, he thought. She knew I would cave. This could only mean that she actually places value on the task she set me, willing to risk her life to see it done. He watched as she dangled the twisted bottle in her tail, teasing its potential to save him from his situation. The message was received. After reading more of Shale's paper, Wiley turned to her and criticised. Tatler is printing thrilling tales of Yolshan busts in Amalur dollhouses, and you're chasing a rumour about an Aurelian shortage. The stuff about Yeshua and Methuselah needs some serious work before this goes to print. He jabbed a finger at the page in an aggressive point, nearly puncturing the paper entirely. Give me a second. Nearly puncturing the paper entirely. Here, quote, despite their seemingly uneven relationship, Yeshua and Methuselah might have a lot more in common than not. Perhaps they might even be covert allies. He scratched out the line from the paper. The word might is an admission of insecurity. We're supposed to have the facts. But we don't have the facts, Shale argued. Not yet. No, Shale. We are the facts. Incas exist to document political and social happenings. If you use ambiguous language, then that suggests a lack of knowledge. Then we might be seen as unreliable. We don't print speculation. While Shale nodded and swallowed her pride. I'll rewrite it, she pouted. Not until I've finished my edit. Such a waste of time. Why can't you get things right on the first crack? Are you going to stand there rotulating all tone, Ludwig? Shale, set him to work. Ludwig was snapped back into reality as Shale sulked her way towards him. His mood immediately shifted to one of slight optimism. You just had to set him off, didn't you? Said Shale. Always in the wrong place at the wrong time, Ludwig. I'm knee-deep in silage, Shale. Would you bring it up to my neck? I'm just saying be more prudent. Noted, Ludwig groused, looking up to where he had spotted Lucy only to find her gone. His decision was made. Shale, he said, looking to her with visible discomfort. Would you happen to have any spiced Junivi lying about? Shale cocked her head and screwed her face into one of perplexed amusement. I didn't think you partook, she said. I mean, well, you never seem the type to relish in fragrance, no offence. While it's true I do detest the usage of perfume, I'd rather smell of anything right now than over the stench of chopper, blood and vilt. He shivered. You really killed Marvell? Well, the mincer did most of the work. Okay. You'll have to fetch some perfume from my chambers. You can take a single bottle. Think of it as a way of thanks. For what? Wiley's going to be so busy scrutinizing you that he won't have time to pester me. I'm sure he'll make the time, assured Ludwig. Shale giggled and made her exit. Ludwig laughed too, though it was laced with playful sarcasm. The freshly scalded Inca negotiated the enormity of the Inkhouse well enough, though he did stop and look around more than once, keeping a weather eye out for the tiny Lucy, who now seemed to have his reputation by the proverbial throat. Outplayed by a mentalist, what a turn of things! His mind sizzled in his head. Need to get my coat mended. This was my nice one, too. He entered Shale's chamber, an area saturated with the foggy mist of labour. Papers were scattered upon the floor, walls and ceiling. Attempted sketches of prime political figures were crumpled and tossed with evident dissatisfaction. Ludwig bent down and picked one up. Upon closer inspection he recognised the sketched figure as Yeshua. To Ludwig's eye it seemed a pretty decent depiction of him, or perhaps it was not. To set eyes on a member of the paradigm would be to glimpse the midpoint of a quantum leap, quite impossible to the lowly. He dropped the sketch to the floor and continued to tiptoe through the chamber, his nose homing in on that oddly specific scent. What made her follow me? He asked himself, and then remembered the context of his errand. Because she's desperate, and quite possibly mad. Madness is not motivated by anything other than serving its own sickness. After a short while of further snooping, Ludwig found a shelf comprised of Shale's perfumes. Amidst the vast array of tinted glass bottles he found that which he sought. The bottle was a mixture of red and blue, very unmistakable in its identity, spiced Junivi. Ludwig seized the perfume and tucked it in his breast pocket, snuggling it behind the cloth given to him by Lucy. Wanting not to linger, he made his exit and returned to the printing machine where he knew Wiley would be waiting. To his opportunity, Wiley's face was etched with amusement and joy, still in review of Shale's paper. The pretentious Inca chortled and laughed aloud as he scanned the page. Lucy was spotted again, this time much closer to Wiley, her scent masked in the haze of inky steam and smoke. Just as his was. Ludwig pressed himself onward. This crawler may be mad, he thought, but that makes her motivations plain. She's here, ready to receive her odd compensation, so let her be compensated. Let her demands be satisfied. If it means getting what I want, I'll do it. She thinks she can learn about Wiley just by knowing what makes him happy, the fool. She's going to get herself killed. Ludwig slowly untucked the yellow-striped cloth from his pocket with his left hand and pulled out the perfume with his right. Etching closer to Wiley, he waited for his opportunity. Wiley turned the page and grumbled through the next slice of Shale's entry, finally bursting into laughter after reading something that he deemed endlessly amusing. Ludwig did not delay. He wandered past Wiley and doused the cloth with a fiery stench of spiced Junivi, unfurling it and brushing down his torn coat within Lucy's area of perception. This also caused his employer to glance up and stare momentarily amidst his laughter. With her tail, Lucy brought the twisted bottle up to her chest and with one of her nails flicked the bottle, resulting in a melodic ring. Is that her way of letting me know she's clocked it? Ludwig mused. So be it. It's subtle enough. Wiley's ears twitched to the sound, but he did not inquire as to its origin, and instead returned to his work. Ludwig shot a furious stare at Lucy, but she only grinned in response and disappeared into the mists of the colossal printing machine. Over the course of the next 3 song tower chimes, Ludwig continued his task. Whenever Wiley would laugh, sing, or cheer, he was there, dousing Lucy's senses in colour and fragrance. On more than one occasion, Ludwig would purposefully engineer hilarity, choosing to utilise his full and considerable wit to forge his satirically written entries into circulation. He also set his substantial artistic skills to work. After obtaining detailed descriptions from a local book bureau, he drew various political figures in hilarious fashion. One depicted Methuselah and Yeshua as cartoonish hand puppet being played with by a cheerful Locket. Wiley spat out his drink upon review and snorted in place of breaths, all while Ludwig once again pulled out the cloth and soaked it in Dunavy. Sometimes he would wipe his brow, other times he would polish the machinery, but he always made sure that Lucy clocked it on some level. Lacemaker was constantly present, watching from the far shadows, enforcing, and as became her habit, flicking her nail upon the twisted bottle in conjunction to Ludwig's actions, adding a very distinctive yet subtle sound to the mix of sensory inputs. This routine continued as the light of Mivium shifted from a soft butter to a blushing rose. It became monotonous clockwork, and all the while Ludwig deemed his actions to be of no consequence other than to satisfy a sickly mind. Of course, the one thing that he did not consider was that Lucy was much further away from him than Wiley, and so if she could see the colours, smell the fragrance, and hear the chimes of the bottle, then so too could Wiley. Psychology is patient work. Part 3. Patient work. Or the result of patient work. Lucy observed the event of the chimes with obsessive intensity, making sure to learn as much as possible about her target. Wiley was a hard creature to impress, but his aptitude was undeniable. He never acted cruelly, although perhaps a little strict. On some occasions, he would fly into colourful rants, often berating an employee to the amusement of their colleagues, though it was all in good fun. Though prone to rage and the odd violent outburst, Wiley knew how to control his incouse, balancing work and play rather nicely. The only problem was his bloated ego and short temper. Positively insufferable. "You rotulated weemers!" he would bark. "Are your minds not a porous membrane? Can you not absorb sound advice? Ludwig stole the ink flow. Not another drop will be wasted on error." Countless times, Lucy observed him tear entire papers to shreds and demand they be written again. "I'll not repeat myself. Once the papers are printed, there's no method available to edit. They must be perfect. Anything less will be burned and stuffed down your corpulent throats." Wiley was surely beyond any powers of reason that Lucy had possession of. His was a conceited brain of absolutism and uncounselled judgment. Her mind was thoroughly made. "I was right to go about the deal this way. He's not one for reason. I just hope it's enough." Suddenly, the song tower called the second chime, and the blushing rose of Mivium began to shift to a deeply bruised lavender, threatening to break into a black phase. Lacemaker's heart thumped against her chest. This is it. She felt the bite of fear. And a ghostly breeze of anxiety brushed past her face. Ludwig, at this point, had gotten pretty well versed in Lucy's hiding habits. He found her fidgeting with... Let's do a semicolon there. He found her fidgeting with her 6-fingered digits upon a high pipe of flowing ink. Nervousness had taken her. Lucy took note of his approach, and both of them scanned the large corridor for any potential interruptions. Ludwig tossed the striped cloth, Ludwig tossed the striped stinking cloth up to her and spoke first. "Right, that's it. I've fulfilled your demands," arm outstretched. "Hand over the bottle." "That wasn't the deal," Lucy whispered. "That wasn't the deal," Lucy whispered in a haze of anger, wrapping the bottle in the Junavy spiced rag. "We agreed to meet back at Royden Street behind Marvel's Chop Shop." "It's Harrow's Chop Shop now," Ludwig corrected, "and she's far less reasonable than Marvel ever was. I need to get back in Wiley's good books. Give me the bottle." Ludwig summoned his employer from the end of the corridor. "Royden," Lucy whispered before scuttling off. "Looks like a black phase is due," Wiley sniggered. "Think you'll see the end of it?" Ludwig threw his arms up innocently and downplayed the severity of Wiley's blatant threat. I was just about to take my leave of the ink house, he insisted. When I return, I'll have something that'll make you whole. I'd have set out earlier, but I was focused on rewriting my piece about the trade differential. Ludwig pulled out a manuscript from his coat and handed it to Wiley. Did you fix the language? I did. No musings or extrapolations, only the facts. And did you change might have found to have found? Better have done it, or your head goes in the machine. Wiley angrily flicked through the pages. It's all been fixed, ready for print, vowed Ludwig. If you want to read it through, feel free. I'll have everything you need by the time you finish. Read it? I certainly shall, and you will be at my chamber door by the time I finish its verification, boy. Absolutely, sir. I'm a fast reader, Ludwig, and this is your last chance. I don't care how witty you think you are. If you're not at my door upon my beckoning, it's the chop shop for you. Wiley turned and wormed himself away. Ludwig exhaled his terror. Ludwig exhaled his terror from behind jittering teeth. Lucy had seemingly left for the rendezvous, and when it became apparent that Wiley was truly gone, he sprinted full force down the corridor and towards the exit of the ink house, Royden bound. It was at this moment that Lucy reappeared upon the pipe, clutching the freshly wrapped parcel in her hands. After wrapping the immediate bottle in the yellow-striped rag, she had further masked it with a rather dull fabric, tied up with dusky string. Time to make the trade with Wiley. With Ludwig occupied, she coiled her tail around the neat package and hurried off in the direction of Wiley's study. The chamber was a jumble of disused mechanical parts, mirrors, old Inca papers and contorted bodies of past employees. Wiley sat upon the ceiling of his chamber, reading through Ludwig's manuscript with his 5 keen eyes. The body on which he sat was extremely fluffy, providing ample comfort for his posture. The body on which he leaned was sturdily bony, a perfect table for him to rest his multiple elbows. With his palms upon his cheeks, he scanned Ludwig's work. Lucy made her way slowly up the wall, trying to keep her panic subdued, and doing her best to focus on what she would say. She had rehearsed the conversation hundreds of times in her head from the instant she heard his name, but this was it, the moment where either the labour would pay off or result in her permanent ejection from life. She etched closer, orienting herself upon the ceiling and away from the floor, where most of the ornate light swirled. Her breathing became rapid, her tail tightened around her newly wrapped parcel, and as she approached the editor of Ruthergush. It is much appreciated, said Wiley. He did not make eye contact, but it was clear to who he was addressing. Usually I have to chase down my dinner, but here you are. Lucy did not relent. She continued her approach, careful and fully alert. Thank you for sparing me the labour. The small, pre-articulated female climbed up onto Wiley's bony desk, keeping her distance. She set down the package before him. Oh, do tell me you brought me some tail-eye spice. I could really go for some tail-eye spice right now. Lovely with fresh flesh. It's an offer. Lucy spoke with full confidence, not allowing her fear to drench her words or rob them of their potency. Wiley giggled. Oh, precious. He finally made eye contact with his small visitor. But I fear you lack a full understanding of the situation, my little dear. Lucy bent down and slowly yanked the dusky string free from the parcel, causing the battered brown wrapping to bloom open, revealing the immediate packaging inside, and letting loose a powerful scent of spiced juniper. Wiley's pupils dilated to large diamonds. Wiley's crossed pupils dilated to large diamonds at the sight of the cloth, black of the deepest kind with stripes of yellow dashing across it like beams of focused electricity. Such a striking thing, so very high in contrast and curiously memorable, yet he did not know why. The smell entered his nostrils and set alight his mind with memory, elation, amusement, calm and felicity. Wiley watched, pacified by his senses as Lucy unravelled the nature of the package. From the shroud, the intense colour and From the shroud of intense colour and fragrance, she held the bottle before him, gripped tightly in the helix of her tail. "I heard you have an eye for trinkets," she said, teasing the unveiled item. She brought the bottle close and flicked it with one of her sharp, crimson nails. The sound ringed in Wiley's ears, a ghost calling to him from history. It sang and tantalized. His senses were under siege, a warfare of a cerebral nature, and all being fought without his knowledge. "I'm not your food," insisted Lucy. "I'm your newest employee." Her face beamed with innocence and playfulness as she fluttered her eyelashes at the mystified Inca who sat in a trance of unexplainable bliss. He chuckled, smiled to the limits of his anatomy, and exclaimed, "Walla wa! Walla wa! What's this little thing then? Looks familiar." He sighed in total awe of the glasswork. "The Tatler papers depicted something similar, something unknown to me." He sucked his teeth. "Strange. You've caught me in a very good mood indeed." "The name's Lucy Lacemaker." "Lucy Lacemaker? Why the second name?" "It's unimportant." "You're a fowler, huh? You know it's illegal to hire fowlers." "I'm no fowler, I'm just small." Wiley pointed a sharp warning finger to her chest. "And don't you forget it." "Yes, sir." "Okay then. In that case, it's a pleasure to meet you." "Pleasure." "So, you'll take it?" Lucy asked, as Wiley scratched his chin inquiringly. His face had become nothing short of a book to her eyes. A book to her eyes. Language sprawled upon its face, and she read it immaculately. "Yes," he said after a brief moment of tense contemplation. "So be it. You're hired, little Lucy." His joy turned twisted. That twittling Ludwig had had his chance, the rotulating Weimer. Actually," Lucy interrupted, "I heard about you through him. He's the reason I'm here." Wiley listened to her with one eyebrow raised in mild suspicion. "I believed he described you, and this really swung it for me, but I believe he described you as loquacious." Wiley's face lit up with flattery. His suspicions were visibly erased. "Did he indeed? You know, that's one of my words." "You don't say." Lucy laughed as Wiley handed her a small piece of paper. "Here, the ink contract. Give it a read, and if you think you're up to it, sign." Lucy feverishly took the paper, placed it flat on the table, and began reading. Yeah, this is just chapter 4, isolated. So I haven't read anything prior to this. So this is just an isolated thing. You're not going to know what's going on in the whole larger story, but this is just sort of like a bubble, you know, because it does have like a miniature little narrative within it. Part 4. Part 4. The Ink Contract by Mandus. I, Mandus, Watcher of the Watchmaker, do now collate this information at the request of my lady, and for the convenience of her stubborn breed. Information, as I have observed, is pivotal to the lady's vision of society. Without the flow of absolute fact, rumours and falseness will spread. This is simple calculation. I declare that the order of the Incas be formed out of absolute necessity, for truth may often be allayed in favour of the calming nature that comes with convenient inaccuracies. And this is a threat to the lady's vision. An Inca is a servant of the truth, bound to report pivotal happenings about their territory and beyond. The Incas will perform this task by maintaining and upholding the 5 laws I now put in place. Seek the truth and report it. Journalism should be in accordance with Lockett's law, accurate and fair. Incas should be honest and ruthless in gathering, reporting, and interpreting information. Rumours, gossip and hearsay are forbidden. Neither speed nor format may excuse inaccuracy. Incas must gather, update and correct information throughout the life of a story. Minimize commotion. Incas must treat sources, subjects and their fellow creature as beings deserving of respect, but the public's need for information comes above the harm or discomfort it may cause. However, pursuit of information is not a license to practice arrogance or undue speculation. Act independently. The highest priority of an Inca is to serve the public. Incas must refuse gifts, favours, accommodation, special treatment, and avoid political or other external activities that may compromise integrity, impartiality, or may damage credibility. Incas must distinguish news from advertising. Be accountable and transparent. Incas must take responsibility for their work and explain their decisions to the public within their text. They must encourage civil dialogue regarding whatever topic they choose to tackle and reject those who want for an unproductive discussion. They must also respond quickly to questions regarding their topic, its accuracy and fairness. Incas must expose malpractice even within their own institutions and abide by the standards of Locket's government. Act in the ultimate interests of truth. An Inca is a servant of absolute truth and must venture into controversial or perilous territory in order to light the way for others. Incas have a duty to spread accurate information to the uninformed, regardless of how they might be perceived by the paradigm. Let all who read this contract and desire to serve the works of truth, information, and order sign below the name they have chosen and be accommodated by the editor who put forth the contract to them. Part 5. To summon joy. Mandus, Lucy commented. Never heard of that one. It's just an alias, Wiley enlightened. The era of the Watcher was a controversial time for Locket, a time where the supporters of Freda still openly rebelled. And so many of the paradigm, not wanting to be targeted by the larger mob, invented writers for their laws. As a way of drawing out the conspirators, Mandus was one such invention. The defectors would poke their heads out to take a bite of Mandus, and as their jaws closed around naught but air, their heads were lopped off by our grand voice in her paradigm. I thought Locket would have been more popular after the defeat of Freda. New ideas are met with opposition, and often fueled by old ones. Locket survived by outsmarting her enemies and proving the quality of her ideas. Lucy Lacemaker, inspired by Locket's cunning, dipped her tiny claws in an inkwell that sat upon Wiley's desk and signed the ink contract. Now then, said Wiley, I'll need a sketch of your face to go along with your name. Why? With the completion of this contract, you'll need to be verified as an employed member of this city. This means that your name and face must be submitted to a buckborough and sent off to the Hamerlow, and then the Malum Library. It's how those dusty old whispers keep a record of those in our city. But only the employed ones? Wiley laughed. They're the only ones worth acknowledging. The rest are filth. He pulled out a large black book from a shelf behind him, splayed it on his body desk. In dark, cruel ink, he carved her name into the page, Lucy Lacemaker, and then masterfully captured her likeness next to it in the form of a magnificent sketch. Then he closed the book and slid it to one side. I'll have a copy made and sent out to our bookborough for confirmation, he grinned. Second here. He grinned. And what about that bottle? Ever seen anything like it before? Breaking the seal of the bottle with his nail. You mean this? What are you doing? Lucy Lacemaker cringed as Wiley poured the contents of the bottle down his throat. After swallowing the liquid inside, Wiley crushed the glass to splinters. Just as I thought. Naught but some forbidden perfume, a pyramid scheme, no doubt. But quite worthless. But why did you hire me then? Lucy's forehead wrinkled with stress. You sold me nothing. I know, so why did you hire me? Because, Lucy Lacemaker, you sold me nothing. Wiley repeated in a clipped voice, leaning forward with a smile. Any creature who can make me believe that nothing is something is worth hiring, seems to me. No idea how you pulled it off, but I don't know. I just had a good feeling about you. It was at that moment that a furious Ludwig burst panting into the chamber, clothes damp in sweat. He looked to Lucy in total astonishment. Ludwig, did you really call me loquacious? Wiley giggled. Ludwig made his wheezing approach, and upon catching his fleeting breath, he responded. Yes, I did. He regarded Lucy with held-back fury. I'm so very glad she found her way to you, very relieved. An awkward silence filled the room, and all three of the creatures looked around, not knowing who was to speak. Well, Wiley finally broke in, you brought me a fine employee, Ludwig. Lucy will be joining us permanently. You will shadow her. Make sure she knows what's what and who's who. Ludwig nodded and motioned for Lucy's haste. She hopped onto his arm, scampered up it and rested smugly on his shoulder. Oh, and Ludwig, Wiley handed over the manuscript. This may go to print. Do some of your funny little drawings. Ludwig and Lucy exited as Wiley laughed feverishly. A sound of confusion to Ludwig, but to Lucy it was the sound of a long, fascinating, though tiresome psychological risk reaching a successful end. Ludwig took Lucy to his own chamber, a rather cramped area of half-finished documents, sketches, and an array of dark, brooding clothing. Despite the sheer number of items present in the room, it was immaculately organised, and upon passing through the threshold, Lucy let loose a grunt. Lucy let loose a grunt of surprised approval. Ludwig stormed to the closest wall and laid his palm flat upon its surface, motioning for Lucy to climb off. He watched as his newest co-worker skittered down his arm and hopped onto the wall like that of a curious reptile. She rolled onto her back, put her palms flat at her sides, and leaned forward to face the Inca, who was pacing up and down the room furiously. Lucy decided to break the tension. Look, I get it, but if you just let me explain my befuddlement, Ludwig began, coming to a halt and facing his deceiver, is beyond physical expression. I venture out to complete our transaction as we agreed, and you're not there. And when I return, the bottle is in pieces and you're employed? How is that possible? He pointed to Lucy accusingly. You are sane, Lucy concluded. Thank you very much. She looked at Ludwig, almost feeling sorry for him. I'm sorry, but I was never going to trade with you. You're not a trader, no offence, but you're not. The moment you hinted that Wiley might know the true value of what I had, it was always going to be him. But the bottle was worthless, and he still employed you. How did you do it? How did you survive? Wiley is cruel, he's vicious, and you... How? Explain it to me. Lucy took a moment to think through her explanation. It would not be easy, and her point of reference would need to align. Once she had ran it through her mind a few times over, she explained. Have you ever smelled something and thought, Oi, this reminds me of this, or that reminds me of this or that? Have you ever seen something and thought, that looks familiar? Yeah. Ludwig's face read no, but Lucy continued regardless. Have you ever heard something and been taken back to a time of bliss or fear? Yeah, you know what I mean? You're referring to memories, Ludwig understood, but I failed to see the connection. Connections, Lucy exclaimed. Memories are formed in the brain, pathways, right? Whenever you smell something, hear something, see something, experience something, it forms a connection. And whenever you receive the same input, that connection is strengthened. That's what memories are. No, you had me flapping about some stinking cloth, Ludwig argued, in denial of his bamboozlement. Ludwig leaned back upon the wall with her hands behind her head, relaxed and smugly regarded the scolding Inca. Whenever Wiley laughed or experienced joy, he saw those colours, he smelled that smell, he heard that noise, that satisfying ting. Lucy mimed the flicking of the bottle. Connections were formed, connections that were reinforced over the chimes, connections brought about not by chance, but design. Ludwig's anger subsided, and his tense posture began to relax as Lucy started to make a genius sort of sense. We created a memory, you and me, a memory of felicity. I caught the cruel and vicious Wiley in a strangely good mood, Lucy giggled. Not for the life of him could he explain why he regarded me with kind eyes, but I can. Because, to him... Because to him, you were a good memory, Ludwig concluded. Now you're getting it? And you... Ludwig shifted closer to her. You talked me up to Wiley? He chuckled. Yeah, Wiley just got fucking Lucy'd. He chuckled, but maintained his suspicion. Loquacious. You know I really do hate that word. Lucy smiled warmly and admitted. Couldn't have done it without you. Well, said Ludwig. That's the last time I help you. Got it? The slight violet light of the room slowly began to seep away, leaving part of the chamber in disturbing shadow. The black phase is upon Mivium. Now settle down while I finalise my paper. After a brief period of silence, Lucy began to look around the chamber, scanning for any and all points of information. Much of it was extracts and references from other writers, books, and the odd random scribble. Ludwig was organised, and so much of his writings was hidden beneath the first page of each stack. But she still managed to pull quite a lot from the chamber. Part 6. Clippings. So, the writings of Ludwig's chamber and the point of interest to Lucy Lacemaker. I'll do that actually. So this is what Lucy's reading. Needlemeyer Dollhouse was reduced to cinders just chimes away from the fifth tone transition. The owner of the dollhouse, Skylar, along with 57 of her dollies, have been found dead. 7 dollies did survive the inferno, their names being Hollard, Lavinia, Reva, Elms, Geneva, Butica, and Griffin. The surviving dollies were briefly shamed by rowdy onlookers, but now reside at Feverfire Bloodhall. Some suspect the fire to be the result of Yortian intervention, while others blame the incident on Fontaine. Another section. So this is basically the way this is laid out. Lucy's reading extracts from the wall. The psychology of writing is a fascinating affair. One may derive much from one's writing style, even down to the pressure applied to the paper. Each Kipperwackian has its own unique style of writing, and many thousands of variables at play. Imitation of another's writing is possible, but only to those who have an extreme eye for hidden detail. Hang on. Yeah. There we go. It's another clipping. With the death of Hamelot tycoon Polly of Polly's Tab, her dollhouse has fallen under the complete control of Thalius, a well-known architect and chemist, and now the owner of the newly named Astellan's brewery. It is not yet known if a Blackhall was involved in the slaying of Polly, nor the reason why she was found stashing unauthorized bottles of an unknown liquid. Another one. In the eyes of the chemist, nothing is unmakeable, and many tasks, regardless of size, would not have been possible without the study of chemistry. For example, when Locket's government issued the first of her laws to the public, they were sent out scratched into black paper with white ink. Needless to say, the underbirth took heed. The black paper was the result of a slightly altered process, cellulose pulp combined with water and black dye, then flattened, dried, and cut. While the white ink was a simple mixture of the following elements: roundhead buds, halo powder, and bright fluid. Part 7, the last part of this chapter. The black phase of Mivium. So, I'm employed then, Lucy began nervously, returning her attention to Ludwig's current work as darkness intruded down her back and her fear of it became apparent. Does the black phase make you uneasy? Ludwig teased. I've not had a good history with it. How's life as an Inca? She deflected. What are the benefits of being employed besides being on a fancy list? Wiley put your name and face in that book of his, correct? Yep, sure did. Not the most flattering depiction of me, but he got my... Not the most flattering depiction of me. He got my scruffy angle. Do that, and then... that. He got my scruffy angle. Ludwig smirked and glanced to her. Which angle was that again? Hello, cheeky tit. Lucy Lacemaker giggled, twirling her left ear with her about her finger. Go on, about the book. Well, that's your proof of employment, and that'll be copied and submitted to our local book bureau. The one that Ruthergush is registered to. Ludwig moved his eyes to his work, but made every effort to force enthusiasm into his voice. That information will be verified by the Burrow, sent to the Whispers of the Hammerlow, then stored in the Malum Library. Then you'll be officially registered as employed. As a result, you'll be able to partake in the larger systems of trade between establishments. Right, of course. You have to be employed in order to go to a laugh house. Lucy raised an eyebrow, curiosity growing. More or less. Of course, there's nothing to prevent one from becoming a freelancer, but even they need to be registered to a book bureau. The only trouble there is that freelancers don't have the benefit of working for larger institutions. They'd need to trade in goods at the door in order to be served. Of course, if they're really successful, they might end up creating a whole business for themselves. The city runs on ideas, after all. Go on, how's it all work then? Lucy's eagerness fought back her fear of the impending darkness. I mean, I've seen it all from afar, but I've never had no explanation of it. But I've never had no explanation of it. Never had any explanation, Ludwig corrected. Yeah, right. Never had any explanation. Gotta talk proper now. Properly. I'm tolling with you. Ludwig grumbled, struggling to hide his amusement. Well, anyway, we work for an ink house, and so our ink house might make a deal with a laugh house down the street. For example, we might provide them papers for their customers to read while they drink, and in return, we inkers may partake in those fine drinks. Trade exists mostly on a larger scale between businesses. It's how they move stock and make profit, rather than trading individually like the freelancers, or like those from out of town. There's nothing to stop one-on-one trades, of course, but the bulk is done between the institutions. At the end of each tone, all the businesses submit their sales, inventory, taxes, and figures to their book bureau. After that, they're all restocked for the next tone, according to their agreed contract, and that's, more or less, how it works. All self-managed, then. Lucy spoke as if she knew already, her voice cloaking her inner confidence, her eyes telling another tale. Ludwig didn't spot this consciously, but he felt it. Indeed. Ruthergush, for example, has trade deals with all sorts of doll houses, chop shops, laugh houses, and blood holes. We provide news and information. We move most of our stock through these deals rather than selling individually. In return, we Incas have access to those businesses within the arrangement. All you need is proof of employment, which conveniently is your name and your face. And the unemployed, those who are unregistered, they're nothing? Lucy asked innocently. They're free to be killed, used, and eaten. To the government, in the eyes of the law, yes, they're nothing. It's not enough to just be born in this culture. You have to contribute. Only then, and only when you contribute, do you exist. But what about the Yolsh? Lucy asked Lacemaker. How do they factor into all these deals? Well, the Yolsh are the same as any other institution. Only their trade is that of order and law. They provide a holistic service to the city and so are welcome in any other institution. It would be unwise to turn away a Yolsh from your laugh house, chop shop or doll house. For while they may partake in the products of these businesses, they're also protecting them, acting as the presence of law. You want the Yolsh in your shop. Things go smoothly when they're around. Lucy screwed her face as another thought popped into her little head. But aren't there differences between the casino and the Hammerlow? How do those two districts work together? Now this question was a legitimate one, born of youth and a genuine lack of experience. A good point, complimented Ludwig. And that's what we refer to as the trade differential. It exists because the voices of the casino and Hamerlow dictate all matters of commerce in their respective districts. Does that work? It works and it does not. On the one hand, the system is very flexible. It allows both Yeshua and Methuselah to run their districts without stepping on each other's toes. It allows new laws and legislation to pass through the government without blockages. The young Inca looked back to his work and flicked through it, reviewing the facts before he made them heard. On the other hand, he said with revised confidence, it's a system with a few holes, and in these holes creatures like Fontaine thrive. It's not easy to exploit, but to the leaders of our breed, the paradigm, that's not enough. That's not enough. Lucy rolled onto her back, now ignorant of the darkness that swallowed her. There's something being done about it there, right? Because I tweaked the system. Well, there's a rumour, and one that we can't print until confirmed, so keep it under your proverbial hat, that Lockett is on the cusp of announcing a solution, but we won't know what that is until the word is passed down from the other much larger ink houses like Starklook. As long as it gets rid of the illegal folk, Lucy spat. Ludwig raised an eyebrow. That would include yourself. I stole from one and used it to better my position, but I ain't like them. But I ain't like 'em. I've had my fill with illegals. Lucy quietly fumed. Ludwig pondered his response. Yes, I'm inclined to agree with you on that one. He then used the little remaining light to scan his work before offering the young lacemaker a final bit of closing advice before darkness swallowed the township. Everybody has something to buy. Everyone has something to offer. Ludwig chuckled to himself and turned to Lucy as the light faded. Made simple, that is our economy. Nobody buys more than they sell. Nobody sells more than they buy. Governed by self-interest, and it all runs on demand. Life is about to get infinitely more complicated for you, Lucy Lacemaker, because now, well, you exist. Soon all illumination had left Mivium, leaving the whole town as a pit, swallowed by the void. Lucy and Ludwig talked for much of the phase, making sure to at least provide the light of conversation before sleep took them. The indignity of rotulation could be avoided. Provided the mind was softly lulled to a slumber, not knocked into a humiliating spasm. In moments of silence, before their consciousness faded, Lucy's mind wandered to dangerous territory and fear gripped her tightly. The one thought that kept intruding on her mind was one that brought great despair. Despite how much she had endured and survived, in those icy waters of Vileborn, though coloured with blood and textured with torn flesh, she did not see Goldoon die.
Well, walla wah. That is it. That is chapter 4. Walla wah. So, that is a little sample of the book. That is to sort of give you now. Of course, I'm on draft 3. The book's largely finished. I'm not expecting you to understand what's going on in the larger story because it is fucking, chapter 4.
And this was the shortest chapter because it's only like 20 pages.
Oh yeah, and that's not even the shortest. That's not even the longest chapter. So as you can tell, my chapters are long. I choose to have really long chapters, split into parts because I don't like the idea of having fuck tons of chapters. So that was one of the shorter ones. So don't worry. And again, as you can tell, nothing was put across that will spoil the story. It's a very personal chapter to Lucy Ludwig, getting to know her methods. So what did you guys think? What do we think of the world, the writing style, the characters, the dialogue? Does it grip you? Is it boring? Is it what? Because I'll unlist the video. So if you just save the link, you can just come back to it and listen to it at any time. So yeah, I good. I'm glad. I'm glad people have enjoyed it. You know. So I will be releasing the book this year. I've actually started the second book. I'm working on the first chapter because I need time away from this book. I've spent 2 years writing it.
I've spent 2 years listening.
So yeah, that chapter offered nothing pretty much in terms of story. It's mostly an event that builds to relevance. You know, obviously there's plot there. There's Lucy getting it. We get to learn how Lucy works. Now, Lucy, as you can tell, I'm sure, is a much more fleshed out character in this story, along with everyone else, but particularly Lucy. You might have deduced she's no longer a psychopath or just crazy out for killing. She's actually quite vulnerable. She gets
Lies.
she's a bit of a compulsive liar. She gets scared. She's a manipulator, but she's not without, you know, her warm side. So this is the beginning of Lucy's story, of course. So, you know, Satellite City Lucy was the foundation, but this is the result. So, and we got to see Wiley getting Lucied. Yeah, he got fucking Lucied.
What did me and Erica call it whenever you first read that?
Lucified, I don't know.
No, whenever Wiley gets Pavloved, it was that one guy that you introduced him to us. He's the one who taught old people how to mug others.
Oh, Darren Brown.
Yeah, he got Darren Brown.
Yeah, Celia's in the first. Basically, Celia's in the first book.
She's in chapter 2.
She's in chapter 2. I chose chapter 4 because it's the only chapter I think. Well, the first 4 chapters are without spoilers. They're all pretty much, you know, setting it up. Chapter 1 is with Lucy, and then chapter 2 we meet Celia, and then chapter 3, you know, a few other characters higher up the echelon. But then chapter 4 bounces back to Lucy, but it doesn't divulge any plot twists because it's a long book. We're talking 700 pages. We're talking 300,000 words. It's a fucking big book. So chapter 4 is at the very beginning, and it's enough to tease, I think, like, what is the liquid? What is that? What's in that bottle? You know, fucking what's gonna happen to Lucy? Will she be able to keep up in this job, even though she's a youth? She's, you know, we've seen how this world treats the young. They fucking eat them. They treat them with no grace. They don't care. So it's like, if you fuck up in this world, it's not like, oh, it's okay, fall off your bike, get up again. It's like, no, you're on the fucking dinner plate. So, you know, there's questions of morality of what happened.
I would say, like, in comparison to the bike scenario, you're placed on Atlanta, Georgia's highway.
Yeah.
While you're learning how to ride a bike.
Yeah.
Good luck.
It's very, very Darwinian. Like, even the way this culture works, like, you're not even considered a part of society unless you're contributing to it, unless you're employed. That's how important they take ideas in this world. And anyone who can't competently contribute is literally nothing. They're used as furniture. They're eaten. They're humiliated. So it's a very brutal society, but it breeds very strong, apt minds. So there's a lot of, there's a moral dilemma there. There's plenty of room for discussion on, you know, the psychological effects that a society has on a person. You know. So there's a lot to explore. So yeah, I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. As for a human wouldn't last very long, I don't imagine, because a Kivawakian eventually has to prove their mettle physically at some point. It's pretty hard to keep your head down for that long. The book is 26 chapters, but they're very long, and that one was one of the shortest. They're very long.
The human would get Lucy. Thanks, Shadow Lover 187.
A human would get Lucied.
By
Well, Lucy at this point in the story is pre-caticulated, which means she hasn't caticulated, and caticulation is a process of maturity. So she hasn't grown to full size, which happens to them in bursts. So she's pretty vulnerable at this point in the story. That's why she uses psychology to get what she wants. You know. Oh yeah, as for a release date for the book, I'm aiming for like October or November, end of the year. Now I'm working with my dad on it, because my dad's obviously, you know, he's written books before, and you know, he's been signed to. My dad is very valuable in this scenario, because he's been signed to EMI and some huge record labels. Like, if you don't know who, like, EMI, it's same record label as Simon Cowell. He was signed to some big fucking record labels, sharing an album with the Rolling Stones in Japan at one point. So he knows the type of contracts that you have to sign to get something published. I know Christopher Paolini, who did Eragon, is trying to petition them to make an accurate film of his books, because they fucked it up the first time. I don't want that to happen. I don't want to get my book published just for the sake of kudos, just for the sake of saying, oh yes, I'm a published author, at the cost of my control, you know, and my ability to choose what happens with it. That would be a mistake, and I think that's it. That's unless you can really get a good deal, I think you should really consider self-publishing, especially if you have an audience, you know, made out for you. Like, I've got, you know, 250,000 subscribers. Now, sure, not every one of those are going to buy the book, probably less than 1%, but that's still a good amount of, you know, a good pool of people to sell to, at the very least. So, I'm probably going to self-publish first, initially, in order to make it the way I want it. And another thing is I'm worried about editors, the red tape, people trying to fuck with it, saying you've got to shorten it or take bits out. Mark Porter, who's one of my other friends, he's had a best-selling book, actually. He was telling me a story about someone who, I can't remember the guy, but he'd written a book, and you could probably find out who this is if you look it up somewhere. He'd written a book the way he wanted it to do, and he was desperately trying to get it published, but the publishers wouldn't approve it unless he took bits out, and he didn't want to do it. And in the end, he killed himself. And only then did they publish it, thinking, well, we might as well publish it anyway, and it was a bestseller. Now that's fucking tragic. You know, that's so I don't want like a battle with people saying, oh, well, you've got to shorten it, you've got to take these bits out. Because they do that shit, you know?
The thing is, like, with this book, I don't think you could take any of the bits.
No, it's
It leads to a bigger thing.
I know,
There's not filler in this book, surprisingly.
I know it's usually the goal to say, oh, I want to be published, but I've had everyone who's ever been published, everyone I know in my family who knows this stuff, has counseled me to, at the very least, obviously pursue that, because why not? You might just get a good deal. You might. It's unlikely, but you might. But it's much better to play to your audience and sell it yourself. There's multiple benefits of doing that. Obviously, you get control over your own story. You get to choose adaptations, and you own the license, and you make most of the money, because if you publish with a publisher, you're making a penny to every pound. You've got to move a lot of units to make that money. So, yeah, I'm gonna look at self-publishing first, and then later on, if maybe I have the leverage, which I don't right now, but if I have the leverage to get a good deal that allows me to keep the rights, that allows me to keep some modicum of control, then I'll do that. I'll definitely publish it properly. But the way I'm doing it, it will be available worldwide anyway, print to order. You'll be able to get hard copies, digital download, and I'll also be producing, because my dad obviously works in audio, I'll do an audiobook, because I think that would be a really good idea.
Force Zio to read the whole thing.
Zio, yeah, probably, you know. I want to get like a full voice cast as well, like an audio dramatization. I think my heart is set on an audio drama.
That'd be nice.
So it's got like the narrator, but then it's fully voice acted with music as well. I think that would be my first step, actually. The August View audio drama. Because I think it will really lend itself to music, voice acting, atmosphere. Based on everything, with like that printing machine, just that part, you can just hear it almost. So I like that idea. But I'm very glad that you guys enjoyed it. I know it's chapter 4. I know it must be sort of confusing just going into this strange world, because obviously a lot of the setup and explanations and lore of what everything is and how it works takes place in the prologue, chapter 1, 2, and 3. But I didn't want to go with any of those 3 chapters because I felt like that they would be too, not spoilery, but too relevant to the plot, that would maybe make people sort of catch on to where things might go. Whereas chapter 4 is a nice sort of breathing chapter. I didn't want to read you guys something that's weighed down by heavy plot. I wanted you guys to get a good idea of the writing style. The characters, the characterizations, the world, the sort of the ideas present. So whereas chapter 1, 2, and 3 they're tasked with setting up a lot of the lore, setting up a lot of the plot, and I want you guys to really get to just take a moment and enjoy some of the one of the quieter chapters. And there are more quiet chapters. This isn't the only one. Don't worry. There are plenty of personal moments. There are plenty of slow burns, you know. But there's also some fucking intense shit later on in the book. So if you're interested to know where Lucy and Ludwig and this Ink House and where things go from here, you will like it. It goes, my guys. You know.
Shan, how much would you estimate a book would cost?
Well, I'm going to release 2 versions. One is the regular hardback, and that'll probably just be like maybe 30. The other is going to be a hardback with a character guide, and basically that is going to be a softback booklet with illustrations of all of the characters in alphabetical order, their height, their weight, things about the character, and that'll be a bundle for a bit more money. Maybe 40, 45. That way, as you're reading the story and as you're introduced to new characters, I think it would be pretty helpful to have a little pamphlet next to you. Not a pamphlet, like a little booklet where you can sort of get acquainted with the character. Because here's the thing, the characters in this story look very different from one another. Okay? They are not human. And it's not always that easy to just sort of remember all of those different formations, because there's a lot. As I said, it's a long book. The character descriptions are extensive, as we saw with Wiley. They're extensive. They're memorable, I think, and they are backed up throughout the story. So it's not like I describe the character once and then never describe them again. I will mention like Lucy's tail, her ears, her shape, along with the other characters as we go through the book, to remind the reader of what this character's shape and formation and abilities are. But it's a long book, there's a lot of characters, and these characters are fucking weird, right? So I think it's fair,
That's an understatement.
you know, so I think it's fair to offer people
a booklet to at least get my interpretations, and that's what this is here at the beginning. Because what you're looking at is the art style of the booklet that me and Carmen have been working on.
Hello.
Carmen is over there. She is.
I'm sitting on the floor in the back ominously.
Yes, you are, Carmen. But that Lucy right there is more or less the sort of style that we're going for. I've actually got a few more here to show you. Here is Fontaine.
I'm waiting for it to show up on your stream, so I want to see if you can see Lost in the... Yeah, you can see Lost in the book.
There's Fontaine. Hang on a minute. Oh, hang on, shit. Here's Heisenthal. So this will be the art style of the booklet. So basically, this is what you'll get. You'll get. Now they're actually my character models, but Carmen has sketched over them to give them the authentic look, because that's the sort of style I want. And then we've got also, can we fit one more? Who do we want? We got, oh hang on, we got Celia here. Oh, hi Celia.
Oh, it's just her face.
No, hang on, I've got it. Here we go. Damn Celia, you're fucking massive. Celia, stop hogging the screen, you fucking slut. So you'll get something like that. So you'll get a booklet, and in alphabetical orders you'll have all of the characters, their heights, their weights. You'll have a page to the left which is a full body sketch of the character, so you can see what they look like. And on the page to the right, most of that will be comprised of other sketches, them wearing different clothings, pulling different face expressions. If they have different stances, like Lucy, she can be bipedal or quadrupedal. And then at the very bottom of the page, you will have their height, their weight, stuff like that. And that is the other edition of the book that I'm going to release, which will be like, I suppose, special edition or something, or I maybe call it something like the Paradigm edition would be quite good. And that's going to be the hardback that comes with, and you'll also, don't worry, you'll be able to buy the booklet separately, but it will be cheaper obviously to buy them as a bundle. So yeah. So yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much all I got for the stream. I'm glad you all popped in. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you're looking forward to it. So yeah. Thank you for the super chats. And yeah, well, I will end the stream here. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for your kind feedback. The book will be released. The first book will be released around October. It will be self-published, hardback, with a character guide, and then I might get it properly published if I get the right deal after that. But then expect the follow-up book, the sequel, to come out either the following year or the year after. But I it depends on how fast I get through it. I don't want to rush. Your support means a lot to me. I will definitely strive for the best version of this book that I can possibly make it. These characters are all waiting, and I'm sure you will enjoy being lost in their strange
political, economic, carnal, fucking bizarre, Mandelbrot, Kivawakian world. So, yeah, plenty of adjectives to go around. Bye, everyone.